Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's see. So Aliana's here. She gets to say first. Good morning, Aliana. Good morning, Lily. Good morning, Cindy. To you. Good morning. Good morning, Ying. Good morning, Jenna again. Jenna. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Carmen. I think that is. Good morning, KC again. Good evening to you, Ella. Hello, Mashid. Who else is here? Just wait for a few more people if we can. How is Min's here? Good morning, Min. How is everyone, by the way? Are we doing okay? We're into week. Is this week 4? Are we in week 4 already? 1, 2. Yeah, we're in week 4. How are you all? How are you all? How are you all holding up in this sort of online environment? Are you getting used to it? Is it going okay? Are you tired of it and want to go back to school? How's it going? Morning, Pearly. What do you think? Good morning, Adelbert. Yeah, how's the online experience? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do you want to go back to school? Liana wants to go back to school. Me too. Me too. Cindy wants to go back to school. Good, don't need to. Yeah, that's the thing. When I when I heard that some students were sort of attending class from overseas and their time zone meant that it would be really late for them, I almost wondered if it would be easier than the early morning situation. And I guess, Ella, it's easier for you. I believe that. Morning, Sabrina. Karen likes waking up 5 minutes to class time. I wish I could do that, but I got to do hair and makeup, and there's a whole thing. I got to run my lines. None of that happens. Yeah, I get that though. That's easy. Manish says good morning. Good morning to you. What do you think? Other thoughts? Is the online thing going okay or not so much? Yeah, the 5 minute thing that's kind of nice, especially if you live somewhere in the city and it takes you a long time to get to campus, right? You save half an hour or 45 minutes or maybe even an hour. Oh, this is perfecto. Okay. Yeah, you're clearly having a good day. Did you win the lottery, Manish, or something? Is there something we should know that, something fantastic has happened to you? Um, Casey is, I'm not sure if those are happy tears. Are those happy tears or sad tears? Or are you laughing at my hair and makeup thing? Luan's here. Good morning. Good morning to you. Okay, so let's see. Today, what I have for you today. Yeah, you were laughing. Okay, good. Yeah, see, I'm funny sometimes. I have my moments. Um, um, let's see. Today, what we'll do, we'll talk a little bit more about Egypt. We'll talk a little bit about religion and what it is, according to kind of an anthropological perspective. We'll look into a little bit of Egyptian religion in terms of who some of their major gods were and what the relationship between those gods were. And then I have a little reading for you to do that has to do with social aspects of ancient Egypt and a little bit of what things were like in the Old Kingdom, is what they call. Manish is not really Just not in the mood for any negative things. All right. That's good. Positivity is good. Although if you win the lottery, don't forget to share it with your friends and classmates and teachers. Just kidding. Just kidding. All right, let's dive into it here, okay? So yesterday, if you'll remember, of course, we were talking about Egypt, and we said we wanted to look through, or we wanted to get some kind of idea of what ancient Egyptian culture was like based on these kind of broad categories, right? So the culture and the environment. Dika, that's okay. I'm glad you're here. We want to get an idea of politics and power and how the society kind of governs itself. We want to see how they interact and exchange things with other cultures, how they engage in conflict and how they resolve those conflicts, their values and beliefs, which of course we'll talk about today, and their cultural expressions, how they sort of express themselves through their culture. Yesterday I asked you to read that section and I asked you to answer all those questions, and of course you did. And what we kind of read and agreed was that people had been living in sort of the ancient Egyptian area. Good morning. I think that's Lim. Good morning, Lim. People had been living in the area of ancient Egypt. Hello, Sam. Really for thousands of years, right? But prior to about 5,000 BCE, so about 7,000 years ago, prior to that, Egypt was kind of a wetter place, right? They got more rainfall, and so people could grow things further away from the Nile. But as you probably know, the Earth's climate is always shifting. It's always getting sort of warmer and colder, or wetter and drier, or some combination of those things in various places. And so in this part of the world, at around 5000 BC, we see that the climate shifts and things become kind of warmer and drier in this part of Egypt. And so the result is that the people who were once living further away from the Nile and kind of growing things there, they're not able to, right? Their land dries up and everybody is forced to move closer to the river itself. And that creates a situation where more people are living in a smaller area of land. And so they start to farm that land more intensively, right? They start to use fertilizers. They start to ensure that the crops are properly watered with canals and irrigation. And then we said that by around 36 to 3300 BC, we start to see complex societies appear. So societies with social differentiation. So there are people in society that have different jobs, different functions, and some of those people have more power and status than others, okay? And so we see people start to appear with different jobs, and again, those different jobs have different amounts of social power. Now, we said that some people are able to, in ancient Egypt, they're able to put themselves above others by connecting themselves to the gods, right? And so if you can imagine, which you probably can, in this part of the world, once people switch to agriculture, their farms become critically important to them, right? If your crops, if you're not able to harvest your crops, if you don't get a good yield from your farm, you're going to starve, right? So the farm is, and your fields are incredibly important. And so you need a good harvest year after year. And so people sort of start to call on the gods in order to basically pray for good weather, to pray for the correct flooding of the Nile. And so those people who are able to correctly predict the flooding are assumed to be communicating with the gods, right? The gods are favoring them. The gods are telling them, when and how the Nile will flood, and these people seem to know. And yesterday we kind of said, well, isn't that just luck? And part of it is luck. Throughout the history of ancient Egypt, it becomes a little more of a science. They become very observant about weather and past floods, and so they get better at being able to predict how the Nile will flood. But there's certainly some luck involved. But again, some people are able to gain extra status because it seems as if the gods are talking to them and sort of telling them how the Nile will flood and when. And so those people gain special status in society. And over time, those people who are connected to the gods eventually become kings. And those kings eventually come to be seen as divine themselves. They get to be seen as gods on earth. And so that's one of the ways in which ancient Egypt is different from the Mesopotamian civilizations, right? Where Sumerian kings and Akkadian kings, they were high status, but they were seen as people, as regular people. Egyptian kings are seen as actual living gods on earth. And when they die, they will go and join the other gods in sort of a mythical way. Morning, Michael. Let's see. Yeah, and so we also said that part of the job of the pharaohs was to... That's okay, but you're late every day, dude. 10 o'clock. Okay, no problem. So the job of the pharaohs was to help to maintain the order of the universe, and they did that by conducting proper rituals. And so, if you imagine the sort of, the calendar app of a pharaoh's phone, if pharaohs had phones, you would find lots of different rituals in their schedule, right? So they had lots of things to do in order to properly honor the gods and make sure that the universe would continue to function, right? And if Egypt was doing well, if agricultural produce was up, if the weather was good, if nobody was sort of bothering them or attacking them, that was evidence that the pharaoh was favored by the gods and that he was doing all of the rituals correctly. Of course, if things weren't so good, it was seen as, pharaoh hasn't been doing a good job of honoring the gods. Okay, so when things are going well for the Egyptian people, the pharaohs get to take credit for it. But of course, if things don't go well, it becomes pharaoh's fault. We talked a little bit about the first king of a united Egypt, who they call Narmer, and he's kind of credited with unifying the upper and lower halves of Egypt. And so it seems that this was a military unification, right, on that Narmer palette, which we had a picture of, and actually I have a picture of too. It looks like this. On that palette, we see very clearly that Narmer here has a club in his hand, right? And he's got this guy by the hair, and he's going to smack him in the head, right? So this seems to have been a military unification, not a diplomatic one, right? The other thing we see is that he's wearing the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, and I just wanted to point these out to you because you'll see them in a lot of Egyptian art, and so they look like this. Okay, so the crown of Upper Egypt is the white one here, and it kind of looks like a bowling pin on this guy's head. And so again, to wear it means that you are king of Upper Egypt, and so that's the upstream part of Egypt, or the part of Egypt in the south. The red crown here, which looks kind of like a little chair with a frog's tongue coming out of it, that's the crown of Lower Egypt, so the northern part of Egypt, or the downstream part. And so here you can see that some pharaohs later are shown wearing both crowns at the same time. So you can see that the figure on the left here, or the figure on the right with the double crown, he's the king of a united Egypt, right? Because he wears the crown of Upper Egypt and the crown of Lower Egypt at the same time. And so here on the Narmer palette, we see that, right? We see that Narmer's wearing the crown of Upper Egypt there in the figure on the left. But then on the right, you can see him kind of on the top part, and he's wearing the crown of Lower Egypt. And so again, later on, we'll see pharaohs that are wearing a crown, wearing the double crown, because they control all of Egypt. So again, from this piece of artwork that we have from approximately 5,000 years ago, we have Narmer sort of militarily uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. We have him wearing both crowns at different times. And again, he seems to legitimize his power by connecting what he's done with the gods. And so at the top, you can see those little kind of, I don't know if they look like cows to you or if they look like people with cow horns, or, but that's the goddess Hathor. And Hathor is a goddess who is sometimes shown as a cow, sometimes she's shown as a woman with cow horns or cow ears, which I think is what that might be. But either way, Narmer is kind of connecting himself to the goddess, right? He's saying that I united Upper and Lower Egypt, and I did it because this goddess favors me, right? The goddess helped me out, and so I am right in doing what I did. We also talked a little bit about Egyptian writing. And so we said that, I think we said, the Egyptians developed a system of writing kind of around the same time as the Sumerians do. And so it's possible that the Egyptians got the idea of writing things down from the Sumerians, but they created their written script on their own. And so there's not really any similarity between the Sumerian script, cuneiform, and the way that the Egyptians started writing. And so again, it's possible that the idea of writing might have come from the Sumerians, but the Egyptians kind of went ahead and did it their own way. We have lots of writing from ancient Egypt, and so as a result, we actually know lots about them. We know a lot about their religion. We know kind of what they like to do in their spare time. We know about their governance. We know about their kings. We have all kinds of evidence of myth and magic and wisdom literature, and so bits of advice to help you, to help you in your daily life. We have all kinds of things that we can now read. And we said that to make things super complicated, the Egyptians had 3 different ways of writing things down: hieroglyphic and hieratic and demotic. And so hieroglyphic is probably the one, is the written script that we are most familiar with from ancient Egypt. And you can see here we have these kind of cut into some stone, but you can see all kinds of different symbols, right? And some of them are humans, some of them are animals, some of them are objects, right? And we said that hieroglyphic was a complicated language because each of the symbols is very difficult to draw. There's a lot of detail in each symbol, and the symbols can work in different ways. They can be phonetic, and so each symbol can, no problem, Jimmy, glad you're here. The phonetic signs represent a sound, and so English works like this. As I mentioned, each letter usually represents one or sometimes a few different sounds. But hieroglyphic also has ideograms, and ideograms are the symbol represents an entire word, right? And so Mandarin is like this. You have a symbol and it represents one word or one concept. And then finally, there are determinatives. And so they have symbols that tell you whether the symbol you're looking at is a phonetic sign or an ideogram sign. So again, pretty complicated to read, right? And pretty complicated to write. Again, if you imagine that you were trying to take notes in class and you were trying to write in hieroglyphic, you would never be able to keep up, right? It takes a very long time to sort of encode meaning this way. And so because of that, you can actually write your name in Egyptian hieroglyphs if you're interested. This is actually my name, apparently. I have no idea if this is accurate or not. But there it is. Apparently it's my name. So because hieroglyphic was so difficult to write, the Egyptians developed other forms of written script as well. And these are much easier to write. And so they develop hieratic here, which is often used by temple priests. and they wrote it on papyrus, which is a type of paper that they had invented. And so you can see here hieratic is much more, much simpler than hieroglyphic is. It's much more easy to write quickly, and it's easy to write on papyrus, right? If you have sort of a quill pen, and yeah, and so that's what it looked like. And finally, we have this Demotic, which comes about a little bit later. Again, it's a very simplified script, and it looks something like this. It actually looks vaguely like Arabic, but I'm not sure if there's a connection between the two written scripts or not. There might be. So one of the things that's really interesting about Egypt's written language is we know a lot about ancient Egyptian culture and religion and politics and history, and we know it because we've been able to read it. We've been able to read those things in the Egyptians' own words. But interestingly, we haven't always been able to read their script. What happens to ancient Egypt is eventually it is taken over by the Greeks. So Alexander the Great, if you've heard of him, he's great. Alexander the Great will conquer Egypt in about 300 BC. And after that, Egypt kind of gets absorbed into the Mediterranean world. And so the Persians rule it for a while, the Greeks rule it for a while, the Romans rule it for a while, and eventually the ancient Egyptian language and written script are lost. People stop writing in them. They start writing in Greek and in Latin because those become the sort of major languages of the Mediterranean world, and people kind of stop speaking this older Egyptian language and they stop writing in the way they used to. And so in kind of the modern world, when we look at 17, 18, 1900s, initially nobody really knew how to read this script. They had some ideas about how ancient Egyptian writing worked, but nobody really knew for sure. Until they found this. Until they found the Rosetta Stone. And so nowadays you might know Rosetta Stone from the language learning software that you can buy, but it's connected to this. And so this, as you can see, is a giant piece of rock. It was found by, I believe, French soldiers in the 1800s, and it was recovered from Egypt and brought back to Europe. Now, the thing that makes the Rosetta Stone so interesting is that it is the same thing written in 3 different languages, 3 different written scripts. And so at the top, you can see part of it's broken off, but you can see in the top, it's whatever is written here is in hieroglyphic. In the middle, you can see it's written in Demotic. So those are 2 ancient Egyptian written scripts. But unfortunately, nobody knew how to read either of them, and so nobody knew what it said. But then, at the bottom, we have exactly the same thing as the top 2 sections, but written in ancient Greek. And fortunately, ancient Greek was never lost. We always knew how to read it. And so, based on that, linguists were able to trace back through the Demotic text and then through the hieroglyphic text to figure out how to read both of these ancient languages. And so again, the stone was found in 1799 in sort of Lower Egypt, and it dates to about 200 BCE, so it's about 2,000 years old. And an Egyptian, well, not an Egyptian king, a Greek king of Egypt, Ptolemy was a Greek, he issued this decree. And again, the decree appears in 3 scripts, but again, because we knew how to read ancient Greek, linguists were able to figure out how to read the other 2. But again, that was no easy prospect. That's still the process of taking ancient Greek and then figuring out the other 2 texts, I think took about 25 years of work, believe it or not. So imagine spending 25 years trying to figure out how to read these two languages based on one, which is pretty impressive. But regardless, that kind of opened the door to learning about ancient Egypt. People were able to read everything that the Egyptians had written because the code was cracked, and it was cracked because of that single find, the Rosetta Stone. Maybe the other thing I'll mention too, this is a bit of an aside, but often when you're looking at archaeology, the way that you kind of understand a culture or what people were doing is by lots of different artifacts. And so you dig up lots of things, lots of them are kind of broken pieces and they don't look like much. Lots of it is garbage. And that's how you kind of construct a picture of what people were doing. In movie archaeology, so if you watch Tomb Raider or The Mummy or Indiana Jones or any of these, those stories are always about one thing, right? They're trying to find this one object or this one statue. Usually in archaeology, it's not about one object. One object usually doesn't tell you much at all. But the Rosetta Stone is kind of an exception to that. It's one object that is super important. And again, it's super important because it becomes the key to reading ancient Egyptian script, which is kind of cool. Right. We talked about other innovations in ancient Egypt. And so we said that, of course, the Egyptians developed intensive agriculture. They developed writing. They created their own paper made of papyrus, which is kind of a grass that grows beside the Nile. We said that they invented ramps and levers. They created a 12-month calendar with 365 days, thousands of years ago. Amazing. They learned how to make glass. Also amazing. How do you figure that out? How do you figure out that melting sand can create glass? Incredible. Arithmetic. The Egyptians are extraordinarily good at math. You cannot build massive temples and pyramids and tombs without understanding the math, without understanding engineering. And the Egyptians are really good at that. They develop medical procedures and they develop ways to carve stone. And so, yeah, the Egyptians are good at all of these things, which is really remarkable, especially since, again, think about the fact that we are talking about things that happened thousands of years ago. If you think about human development, if you think about human sort of technological and scientific progress, you could probably almost imagine it as a graph, right? And so I think technological development doesn't go like this. It kind of goes like that. It's kind of an exponential growth. And so we're kind of just at the beginning of that curve up. Now, of course, technology is changing very rapidly, but for the longest time, human technology was very basic, very simple. And now all of a sudden, we start to see an increase and people start to develop engineering and math and geometry and medicine and writing, astronomy, astrology. All of these things start to appear in certain parts of the world. And of course, Egypt is one of those parts. Okay, here's my question for you, good people. Most historians would agree, I think, that Egypt was a very religious civilization. Okay, so religion played a central role in the lives of these people. Everything that they did had a religious significance because, of course, their king was a god, right? So again, I'm joking here, but kind of not. Even paying your taxes is a religious act because you are paying your taxes to the god. And so really every part of Egyptian life was infused with religious meaning. But as an anthropologist, maybe I'll ask you the question, what is religion? And what is religion for? What is its purpose? Why do we have it? What is it? What does religion do? Why do people have religion in the first place? Where does it come from? What do you think? Okay, so Karen says to make it to the afterlife. Okay, so we need to, if we want to enter some kind of afterlife, we need to know how to get there. Sam says to make people believe in something. Definitely, right? Belief is a very important part of what religions are. Casey says to have someone to look up to. Yeah, so we might want to feel protected or as if we sort of belong to something greater than ourselves. That's true. Cindy says to show our beliefs. Yeah, so religion does that. Religion is kind of a set of beliefs that helps us to understand how the world operates, right? Siobhan says to belief and worship of a controlling power. Yeah, so in religions we usually imagine some sort of power greater than ourselves, right? No matter if it's one god or multiple gods or some sort of supernatural power. We think of something greater than ourselves, right? Religion gives us rules to follow. Yeah. Often a society's morals, right, its ideas of what things are right and what things are wrong, those are often encoded within religion, right? Ayana says, yeah, it brings people to. Again, there's that element of belief, and there's the idea that religion is something that unites people together. Dika says for people to believe and do the right things. Yeah, so again, the element of belief is important, and the element of morality is important, right? And again, often our ideas of what's good and bad and what's right or wrong, often those ideas are included in our religion, right? Our religion tells us how to behave and what things are good or bad or right or wrong. Alice says sometimes people can't explain something and they would say it's made by gods or by Buddha. Yeah. So humans use religion to explain things that they cannot, right? And so how was the universe created? What happens when we die? Those are large questions to some degree that we still have not answered. And so religion allows us to do that. It gives us an explanation, right? And Sam says, yeah, to make people follow the rule. That's a very kind of Marxist interpretation there, Sam, but it's true. Religions can often be used as a method of social control, right? So if you have a group of people and you want them to do a certain thing or not do a certain thing, then sometimes it helps to convince them that the gods say that they shouldn't do this, and then maybe they won't do it. And so again, from a certain perspective, religion is a method of social control. It's a way of getting people to do something or getting people not to do something. Anything else? I think that's pretty good, actually. We have, you've talked about the fact that religions require belief, right? We've talked about the idea that religions give people explanations for things that are not easily explainable. You said that it has a lot to do with morality and ethics. So our religions usually they help to tell us or guide us what things are good and bad and right or wrong. And you've also said that it binds the community together in some way. Okay, it allows people to have a group experience. So that's pretty good, and it's almost exactly what I'm going to tell you here, which is pretty impressive. So here's what we'll say religion is, okay? And again, if you are a religious person, don't panic. We're not trying to call your beliefs into question. We're just trying to look at human religion from an anthropological perspective. And so this is kind of how anthropologists view religion. Again, if you have your own religious beliefs, we are not trying to call those into question, okay? So don't worry about that. So here's what we'll say about religion. And again, this isn't far from what you've told me already. We'll say that religion are beliefs and rituals that are practiced by cultures to maintain the social order. So again, a lot of our ideas about how we should behave and how we shouldn't are encoded in religion. And so it helps us to kind of work together and live together and cooperate together when we're all following the same rules, right? We'll say that religion is a dynamic system within a culture. And so dynamic means that it can change over time, which religions do, and it evolves to meet the needs of the people. And so religion is a thing that helps people to live in their environment. It helps them to succeed. Religion is a symbolic practice. We said that culture was symbolic. Religion is a symbolic practice that maintains the worldview of a culture. And so, however you see the world, however you think that the world works, however you imagine our place in the universe, religion helps to maintain that view, right? It helps to support that view. And again, finally, it engages people in collective experience. And I think that's what Eliana said. It was one of the benefits of religion is that it brings people together, right? And those people have an experience together. And that's very helpful, right? Humans are social creatures. We do things together. We do things in groups. All right, 5 characteristics of religion for you, okay? The first one is that all religions assume that supernatural beings or powers exist, and the use of those and use specific individuals to deal with them and to perform necessary rituals, right? And so here we see a few types of individuals that we use to interact with supernatural powers. And so we have an imam here. We have a Siberian shaman. We have a Protestant or an Anglican priest, I think. And then we have a guru from India, I'm guessing. So all of these are all different religions. They're all different spiritualities. All of these people worship different gods, but they are united in that they are the people that society has selected to interact with the greater power, whatever the greater power is, right? Whether it's, whatever the greater power is. All religions have individuals that can go between, right? Can go between the world of humans and the world of the gods or God. And so again, priests, imams, shamans, gurus, Jedi Knights, if you're into that sort of thing. All of those people are kind of people who can go between these two worlds, okay? And so all religions have these people, and they assume that some sort of greater power exists, whether it's a single god, whether it's multiple gods, whether it's an energy force, whatever it is, all religions have these people. 2, cultures rationalize their religious systems through the use of myths and storytelling. And so we've talked about a few myths already. We talked specifically about the Epic of Gilgamesh. And these myths are consistent with the worldview expounded by a cultural group. Does anyone know who these people are along the bottom of this slide? Do you recognize any of them? So the way that cultures support their religious beliefs and support their view of how the world works is through story and through myth, right? And so the Sumerians, for instance, the Sumerians, for instance, they believed in certain gods, right? And they believed that the earth was created a certain way. And then the story of Gilgamesh occurs in that world, right? And so some of the gods are characters in the story of Gilgamesh, right? And so when you hear the story of Gilgamesh, yes, you enjoy the story of Gilgamesh. It's fun, it's exciting. Yes, you learn the moral or the lesson that comes from the story, but the story also supports the society's religious belief, right? And so if you enjoy, every time you enjoy the story of Gilgamesh, it supports the other beliefs you have about who the gods are and how you should act towards them. Okay, so myth is a supporter of religion. I think the people along the bottom of this slide, by the way, are mythical figures in kind of the traditional culture of the Philippines. They're sort of mythical characters and gods. So the myth supports the religion. Okay, and if you wanted to look at Christianity with this lens, for instance, Christianity has beliefs about the fact that there's one God. Christianity has beliefs about Jesus. But the Bible is full of all kinds of other stories that support the religious view, right? And so if you didn't believe in Christianity, then you might look at a lot of the Bible stories as myth. And those mythical characters like John and Paul, they support the worldview of the religion itself. And so they kind of work together. Of course, if you're a Christian, then you believe, you wouldn't call those stories myth, but I'm just kind of trying to give an example here. So all cultures support their religious beliefs with mythical stories. And those stories are, again, they exist to help support the religion. The third characteristic of religion is that it serves to reduce anxiety by providing an explanation for the unknown and for teaching moral order to the next generation. And you guys said exactly those things, right? There are scary things that humans don't understand, right? We don't understand our place in the universe. We don't understand why things are the way they are. We don't understand what happens when we die. And so religion helps to reduce our anxiety and gives us an explanation, right? It's very comforting to know that when you die, that's not it. Or it's very comforting to know that when you die, you're going to go to a paradise, right? Or you're going to go to heaven, or you're going to go to this nice other situation, or that it's actually not the end. You're going to be reincarnated. You will be born again somewhere, somehow else. All of those are kind of very comforting to know that the end of your life is not the end of your life. And so religions often offer us some sort of comfort and explanation about things that we don't really understand, right? And so all religions have some sort of explanation for things that are not easily explainable. 4 characteristic. Religion is a convenient way of transferring the burden of decision-making from individuals to supernatural powers. So what's happening here is that if you are a king and you have to make decisions, if you make the wrong one, then it's your fault, and the people are all going to be mad at you, right? And they're going to storm your palace with torches and pitchforks and be very upset, right? So if you're making decisions because they're your decisions, then you have to suffer the consequences of them, right? You're responsible for them. But if you have a God, you can transfer the burden of decision making to the God, right? And so instead of the king coming out before the people and saying that I am the king and I decide we should do this, it's much easier to come out and say, I am the king and the God has told me that we should do this, right? Because then if you're wrong, well, it's not your fault, it's the God's fault, right? The God told me to do it, it's not my fault. And so if you're a king, having gods gives you the ability to kind of transfer your responsibility to something else, so that if things go poorly, if things go horribly wrong, that it's maybe not your fault and the people won't, murder you or something. So religion can be very useful for this as well, for transferring your responsibility to some other power. And 5, religion serves as a mechanism of social control by establishing appropriate behaviors and by punishing those who have transgressed them. Yes. So all religions have some idea of a moral code, some idea of what things are right and what things are wrong. Of course, depending on the religion you're talking about, those things vary, right? And so there's all kinds of rules about how humans behave, but often they are encoded in religion, and sometimes they're even backed up by significant punishment, right? And so from a Christian perspective, if you sin, if you commit sins, there will be a punishment. You will, after you die, you will go to, not the good place. You'll go to that warm place, not Hawaii. Religion serves as a way to control people, to get them to follow the rules, right? And if they do follow the rules, then maybe there will be some sort of reward for them, either in this life or in the next life. And if you don't behave well, if you don't follow the rules, then there may be punishment for you, again in this life or maybe in the next one. So those are kind of broad ideas about how all religions work, okay? So all religions have some sort of belief in a greater power, whatever that power looks like. All religions have people who can interact with that greater power, whether they're priests or gurus or whoever. All religions have built into them explanations about how society works. They all have moral codes built into them. And again, they provide for a collective experience. And so we should probably just talk a little bit about that collective experience too, because it's important. Question for you: who has been to, if you've been to like either a concert, so a music event with a band or an artist that you were really excited about, or a sporting event, a really exciting sporting event, how did it feel to be part of that big group of excited people that were excited for the same reason, whether it's the team winning the game in front of you or whether it's your favorite kind of musician or band on stage? Have you had that experience, and what did it feel like? Have you had that experience, and what did it feel like? Yeah, happy, right? With 2 exclamation points. Felt nice. Okay. Let's see, it's fun. Yeah. While you're answering here, I'll tell you I'm from Edmonton, Alberta, and Edmonton's always been a big hockey city. We have a team, the Edmonton Oilers. A big part of Edmonton's identity is connected to that team, and a big part of the identity is connected to that team. And when the team was sort of first entered the NHL, the first few years of its history were really exciting. Edmonton had a great team. They were all these kind of young, exciting players, and they were really exciting to watch, and they wound up winning a few Stanley Cups, which is the top prize in the league. And so it was a super exciting time to um, be part of that. And still, that is a part of Edmonton's culture, is this team, the Edmonton Oilers. And I've been to a few Oilers playoff games, so when they're in the playoffs, and the feeling in that building is unbelievable when the team is succeeding and everybody's on their feet and they're swinging things around and they're stomping their feet and they're yelling, and it is an incredible experience when everyone is kind of vibing the same way, right? So Sabrina says you feel connected with people around you. Yeah, you feel connected. Interesting. Yeah, amazing. You went to a concert and it was the best day of your life, right? So not only are you enjoying the thing that's happening, right? Because you get to see your favorite band or artist or sports team killing it on the field or on the ice. Not only do you get that, but there's this kind of feeling of everyone around you feeling the same way, right? And there's something pretty amazing that happens. And religion is part of that too, because people can have religious experiences the same way, right? You can have everyone around you having this kind of very profound, connected moment. And it's special, right? It almost feels like there's something else happening. And again, it can happen at sporting events, it can happen at concerts. And so even when there's no religious thing going on, it can still be, a very amazing experience. And so when you kind of work, religion and the supernatural into that, people can really have a powerful experience all at the same time. And so religion is something that can create that sort of experience. And again, it helps to convince people that something is really happening, that there is something powerful going on. And again, it helps connect people together and it helps them live together and work together and cooperate. So even if you don't believe in religion, even if you think religion is a bunch of made up fairy tales, even if you believe that, which many anthropologists do, religion is still a critically important part of culture, right? It has a bunch of very important functions, and it helps people to live and work together in kind of a happy, productive way, right? Even if you don't believe in any religion at all, it's very, very important and very useful. Okay, so maybe what we'll do here is we'll take a quick break because we've been working really hard. Take a break, stretch your legs, get a drink, whatever you need to do. I'll see you back here in a few minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit about specifics of Egyptian religion. Okay, so take a break. I'll see you back here shortly. Okay, people, and we're back. So we were talking about some of the sort of broad characteristics of religions, right? And we said that there are supernatural powers and people who know how to interact with those powers. We said that there are myths, there are stories that support that religious worldview or support our idea of how the sort of supernatural world works. We said that religions often give us comfort and give us answers to questions that we can't easily answer ourselves. We said that in some ways, religion can be useful for people in power, right? They can help to legitimize decisions or to sort of pass responsibility for the decision to the God, right? We see the legitimization thing, we see that happening with Hammurabi, right? We saw Hammurabi be sort of given the law code from the God of justice, right? So he was legitimizing what he was doing through connection with the God. And who else did we see do that? Oh, and we saw Narmer do that as well, right? Egyptian King Narmer, he's got those little faces of Hathor at the top of the Narmer palette saying that, hey, I'm uniting Upper and Lower Egypt and I'm doing it because the god supports me or the goddess supports me, right? So political leaders, government leaders can use religion to legitimize what they say, right? And Narmer does that. And finally, it gives us a moral code, right? It gives us an ability to work together and a collective experience, right? It helps us to cooperate within a society. We said it did all those things. So, Egyptian religion, of course, we know that it was polytheistic, right? We know that Egyptians had multiple gods, just like the Sumerians and Akkadians did. And these gods are responsible for forces of nature and sometimes for certain aspects of human life. Okay, so the world of nature and the world of humans, in terms of aspects of ourselves, are kind of attributed to or controlled by the gods. And as you've probably noticed by now, Egyptian gods are often shown with human bodies and animal heads, which makes them kind of cool, I think. Not always. Sometimes Egyptian gods are shown as full humans. Sometimes they're shown as full animals. But I think probably most often we see them as anthropomorphic. So in the form of humans, but of course they have, many of them have animal heads. So probably the most prominent of the Egyptian gods, although it changes over time, is Ra. And Ra is the sun god. Initially, he's just one of many gods, but he slowly becomes kind of the most prominent or the most important god. But that said, there's still lots of other gods that people pray to and give respect to as well. And I just wanted to introduce you to a few of these gods that are more important than maybe some of the others. So here's a very important god in ancient Egypt, Osiris. Osiris, as you'll hear very shortly, is a very old god. So he's kind of around close to the beginning of creation. And we often see him painted in this color. And so you can see he's kind of this greenish sort of color. And he is that color because he is connected with fertility and with the mud of the Nile, right? Because the mud that gets left behind after the flooding is very fertile, right? That's where life comes from. And so he's kind of painted that color in order to symbolize that fertility. You can see he's wearing the crown of Upper Egypt if you're being observant. And he's also holding two things in his hands. He's holding a crook, which is the thing on the right side. And then he's holding a whip. He's holding a flail on the left side. And those are symbols. Those are symbols of kingship in Egypt. And so often you will see Egyptian kings, Egyptian pharaohs holding those two things because they are, again, symbols of kingship, as is that crown he's wearing. So Osiris is a king of Egypt. He's a god. He's he's kind of a prominent leader of the gods on earth, and he's also the son of Ra, which is the sun god. He is the husband of Isis. Isis is also his sister, which is a little gross, but that kind of happens a lot in many myths, and certainly in Egyptian myth. So Osiris and Isis are brother and sister, but they're also husband and wife. And they have a child together called Horus, who we'll talk about in a minute. And in the story that we'll hear very shortly, you'll see that he becomes the king of the underworld. He is murdered by his, I'm going to sneeze here, hang on. Whew, okay, I'm good. Osiris is murdered by his brother Set, and so eventually winds up being king of the underworld for that reason. And we will hear that story in just a minute. So here's Isis. Isis is another critically important god in ancient Egypt. She's one of the main ones. As I mentioned, she is the sister and the wife of Osiris. And she's kind of a protective woman mother goddess. And so she's very popular in ancient Egypt. Lots of people pray to her and worship her. But interestingly, she remains popular outside of Egypt as well. And so there are Greeks and Romans that also worship Isis hundreds of years after ancient Egypt is not as popular. And there's even some people today who sort of pray to Isis or respect Isis, which is kind of interesting. Here's Horus. He is a god of war, but he's also associated with the sun. He's the son of Osiris. We often see him with the head of a falcon here. And he's going to, I'll tell you the rest of that story, but he's associated with the story of Osiris and Set and Isis as well. And finally, here's Set. And so Set's kind of a funny looking creature. Nobody's quite sure what he's supposed to be. He kind of looks like an aardvark. Maybe he's a bit like a jackal, which is a dog. He's always got these squared off kind of ears, which are quite strange. As you can see, sometimes he's shown as a pig or a hippopotamus. And he's, depending on the time that you look at him, he is sometimes seen as a god of chaos, sometimes as a god of the desert. Sometimes he's later on he's kind of seen as more of an evil god, but he's kind of the bad guy in the story that we're about to hear. And again, he's married to his sister Nephthys. So again, we have some incestual stuff happening here with both Osiris and Set, two brothers, being married to their two sisters, Isis and Nephthys. So that said, I have a little video for you to watch. And so I'm going to put the link to the video in the live stream, or the live chat, which I just did. And I'm also going to put it into Microsoft Teams, which I also just did. And so what I would like to ask you to do is to watch this video and then answer these questions. And so the questions are in Microsoft Teams as well. And so this video is going to talk about pantheons. And a pantheon is a fancy word for a family of gods. And so the video is going to compare the sort of Sumerian Mesopotamian pantheon with the Egyptian one. And then it's going to tell us a little bit of the story about Osiris and Isis and Set. Okay, so it's going to do a few things. And so I've got a few questions for you here about what the purpose of gods is and why do people imagine divine characters. Um, Something significant about the Sumerian pantheon and something that we might learn about Sumerian culture from this pantheon. This is a little bit of a tricky question, number 2. You kind of have to be paying attention closely to get it, but we'll see how it goes, okay? Number 3, who is first of all the Egyptian gods? That's an easy one. Whoop. That's an easy one. Number 4, how do we know that the sun was seen as important to the religion of ancient Egypt? And then finally, how does the story of Osiris explain the need for mummification? And so again, if you know anything about ancient Egypt, you know that they mummified their dead. They dried them out and wrapped them in bandages and buried them away. And so how does this Osiris story explain why people should be mummified? Okay, so those are the questions. The questions are in Student Portal. They're also here. The video itself is, I think, about 10 minutes long or so. So maybe I'll give you about 15 minutes to watch the video, answer the questions. Don't forget to type them out. And then we'll meet back here and we'll talk about some of these questions, okay? So go watch the video. And then be ready with some answers, okay? Okay, people, we're back. I hope you enjoyed the video. That guy's always entertaining, I think. Um, as you can see, he's in the video. He was talking about pantheons, so families of gods, and he was talking also a little bit about creation stories, and so stories about the way in which the world is created. All cultures and all religions have these creation myths. Um, Most of them are quite bizarre, and so there's lots of kind of weird things happening. People kind of give birth to children by sort of spitting them out of their mouths, and then brothers and sisters are marrying and having sex, and there's all kinds of weird things happening in creation stories. And so the Sumerian creation stories and Egyptian stories are like that. They're very confusing and strange, but let's see what we can take from these. So I know we only have a few minutes left, but we'll see what we can get through here, okay? So the first question I ask you is what is the purpose of the gods? Why do people imagine these divine characters? And so Cindy says they personify aspects of nature and of human nature, right? So some of these things are kind of abstract and difficult to understand, and so the gods kind of help us to understand these things in a way that's easier to that's easier to think about for the human brain, right? We're used to human people, and so understanding these things as human is easier for us, right, Sesame? Right? Um, Casey says the gods bring and sustain life. Yeah, that's an important thing too, because life is kind of mysterious, right? It's at least to the ancients, it was difficult to know where it came from, right? It was very easy to know when something wasn't alive, right? This thing is not alive. This thing here is alive. And so we can very easily tell the difference between things that are living and things that are not. But where does life come from? And then when something dies, where does life go, right? These things are were very difficult to explain for ancient people, and to some degree they're still difficult for us today. And so religious stories like this and myth help us to figure those things out, right? They help give us an explanation for those. Karen says to know more about the world. Yeah, so humans want to give things meaning. They want to understand how things work, and these stories help us to do that. Thika says the purpose of the gods help overcome fear of natural laws such as death and disintegration. Gods are created by the personification of nature and the personification of people. Yeah, so that first part there, Thika, to overcome fear of the natural laws of death and disintegration. So what he's saying there is that the idea for human beings, the idea that we are eventually going to die, that now we are living a life, we are alive, and that life is going to end at some point, is terrifying, is scary, right? It's scary. Yeah. And so because that idea is frightening, humans create gods that are not mortal, gods that can live forever, right? Because if gods can live forever, that means that there might be a way in which we can live forever as well. And so that's kind of what they're saying here, Thika, with that first point. We can overcome the fear of death by creating characters, by creating gods that don't die. Okay? And as long as there are things out there that are immortal, things that don't die, there's a possibility that maybe we won't die either, right? If we do the right things, or if when we die, we actually aren't dead, we actually go somewhere else. Manish says the purpose of God is kind of not certain, but we do use the word God for things that we don't understand. God holds the balance of life, death, and nature. Yeah, that's very true. Situations that we can't describe, things that we don't understand, we understand them by personifying them, right? By imagining them in the form of a person, right? And And some religions are like this. I grew up Catholic, and so to my understanding, in Catholicism, God is personified as kind of an old guy with white hair and a beard, but that's not really what he is, right? God is kind of everywhere. God is everything. God is this power, right? That's kind of how the Catholics, I think, imagine him. But even though we might personify him, we might imagine him as this kind of old guy with white hair and a beard. That's not really what he is. He is more than that. So I think, Manish, I think you're correct there. Yeah, and so actually, Jimmy, I think that's kind of a even simpler way of saying is believing in something immortal means that you too can live, right? You too might be immortal as well. Good. Okay. Here's the tricky question. I don't think it was quite as hidden as I thought, but did you catch it? So, what was significant about the Sumerian pantheon? So, what can we learn about Sumerian culture from their rather strange family of gods? This was a culture environment connection. That's why I wanted to ask it. This was a connection between culture and environment. Cindy says they represent the most important natural forces in the life of ancient people. Yeah, so Mike Rugnetta was saying that the way that we read mythology can help us to understand what people thought was the most important. And so we have gods for the earth and for the sky and for the wind. And we take those things that are abstract and we give them person form. We give them human form so that we can understand how they work. Helps us know a lot about culture. That is true. Maybe, Karen, maybe not so much with the Sumerians, but with the Egyptians, definitely. It was very common practice in some points of history in Europe for pharaohs to marry their sisters. And actually, in many royal families, you see that happening where the king will marry a sister. And the reason they do that, of course, is because the more people you kind of connect to the family, the more people who marry into it, the more people who can sort of see a path to the throne. And so the more families that are connected to the royal families by marriage, the more chance you're going to have people fighting for the throne, people poisoning each other, and it can be really messy. And so sometimes you'll see that the king will marry his sister in order to have a queen, but it doesn't add any other families into the royal family. But yeah, the fact that many of these origin stories have incest might support the idea of brother of a king marrying his sister in real life, right? Did anyone catch it? Maybe not. It had to do with the sheep god. Had to do with the sheep god. Why was that interesting? Why was that interesting? Okay, I'll give you a hand. The sheep god is interesting because it sort of imagines people as connected to a subsistence strategy where they herded animals, right? So Mike Rugnetta says that we have a couple of characters in the Sumerian pantheon. One is a shepherd, one is a sheep god, and one is a bull, right? Those are all sort of animals that you keep in herds, right? But the Sumerians were agricultural people, right? They were growing crops. And so you would think that they would have a god of agriculture, right? A god of the harvest, a god of wheat or something like that. But in their sort of basic pantheon, in their basic family of gods, instead, they have a god that is connected to pastoralism, that is connected to sheep herding. And so Mike is saying that, well, maybe this is connected to an older time. The sheep god and the bull of heaven are connected to a time before the Sumerians were agriculturalists, before they were farmers. They herded sheep, and so the sheep god is a part of their religion from before they were farmers. And so there's a little connection there between the way people got their food, they herded sheep, and their culture and their religion, right? We see those things connected in the Sumerian pantheon. And again, strangely, we don't see an agricultural god in that main pantheon, but we do see one in Egypt, right? Because Osiris is that, right? Osiris teaches people how to grow food, and so he's kind of an agriculture or fertility or harvest god, in addition to being a bunch of other things. And so we do see that with the Egyptians. We don't see it with the Sumerians, which is interesting, right? Okay, so we are fresh out of time. We've got a few more answers to deal with, but we'll deal with them first thing tomorrow. We have a written assignment that we're going to need to get on top of, and so I'm going to try to finish creating that tonight so that we can talk about it tomorrow, and then we'll finish this. We'll talk about the written assignment. We'll do a little bit more regarding Egypt tomorrow as well. So we're fresh out of time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for doing such good work there in the live chat, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so bye.